In the sprawling, indifferent heart of the metropolis, millions of lives intersect every day without ever truly connecting. Stories brush against each other like strangers in a crowd, each on a separate trajectory, each with its own history, its own secret ache. This is a story about one such intersection, a moment of screeching tires and shattered glass that would bend the paths of two souls, separated by time and circumstance, and set them on a collision course with a past they thought was lost forever. It begins, as many things do, with a man on a mission, though not the one he thought he was on. ACTI, the collision of worlds. The city was a symphony of organized chaos, and Leo Martinez was one of its most weary violinists. From the saddle of his courier bicycle, he saw the metropolis not as a place of dreams, but as a grid of deadlines and destinations. Each pedal stroke was a beat in the relentless rhythm of his life, a rhythm dictated by dispatcher calls, traffic lights, and the ever-present pressure of the ticking clock. His thighs burned with the familiar ache of a 10-hour shift, the damp chill of the late autumn air seeping through his worn jacket. Leo was 30 years old, with eyes that held the quiet intelligence of a scholar and hands that were calloused from a decade of labor that didn't require it. He had a degree in history, a passion for forgotten narratives, but the realities of family debt and circumstance had rerouted his life from dusty university archives to the unforgiving asphalt of the city streets. He delivered everything from legal documents to gourmet lunches, a ghost in the machine of urban commerce. Welcome back to CJ Stories, where we bring you emotional and heart-touching stories that speak to the soul. If you're just joining us for the first time, you're welcome to this wonderful big family. We're so glad to have you here. Please make sure to watch till the end, and if today's story moves you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, give us a like, and share this video with your family and loved ones. Now, let's dive into today's story. But as he weaved through the congested arteries of downtown, a different, more personal search was always humming just beneath the surface of his thoughts. Tucked into a small, zippered pocket inside his jacket, nestled against his heart, was a small object wrapped in a faded piece of velvet. It was a wooden bird, no bigger than his thumb, carved from a piece of light-colored pine. Its wings were slightly outstretched, its head tilted as if listening for a distant song. It was smooth to the touch, worn down by years of anxious rubbing. It was half of a set. His half. He was searching for Ellie. He didn't know her last name. He didn't know where she had gone. All he had was a 20-year-old memory, as vivid and painful as a fresh wound. They had been inseparable, two lonely children who had built a kingdom for themselves in the small patch of woods behind their low-income apartment complex. He was Leo, the quiet boy who read books about ancient kings, and she was Ellie, the girl with eyes the color of summer moss and a laugh that could chase away any shadow. The day her family left was a blur of confusion and heartbreak. Her father had lost his job, and they were gone overnight. In their last frantic moments together by the old oak tree they called their fortress, they had made a promise. He had given her a wooden bird he'd spent a month carving with his grandfather's whittling knife, and she had given him its twin. "So we can find each other again," she had whispered, her small hands trembling as she pressed the bird into his palm. "No matter what." "No matter what," he had echoed, his voice thick with unshed tears. 20 years later, "no matter what" had become the defining principle of Leo's quiet existence. In a city of 10 million people, he looked for her. He scanned faces in the crowd, listened to the cadence of voices on the subway, always hoping for a flicker of recognition, a ghost of the girl with moss-green eyes. It was a foolish, impossible quest, a needle in a continent-sized haystack, but it was the one piece of his past, of himself, that he refused to let go. His dispatcher crackled in his ear, a staticky voice breaking through his reverie. "Leo, pick up at Sterling Tower, 45th and Lexington. Priority package. Rush delivery to Vance Global, 12th and Broadway." "Copy that," Leo grunted, shaking off the melancholy. He adjusted his helmet, checked the traffic, and pushed off the curb, merging into the relentless flow. Miles away, in a silent, climate-controlled limousine gliding through the same city streets, Ilara Vance felt a different kind of pressure. The world outside the tinted windows was a muted, distant film. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of expensive leather and the low hum of a conference call. "The Q4 projections are unacceptable, Marcus," she said, her voice calm but edged with steel. "The Ethelred project is 6 weeks behind schedule and hemorrhaging capital. I want a full diagnostic on my desk by morning. Not a summary. A line-by-line breakdown of every expenditure and every delay. Is that clear?" On the large screen embedded in the seatback in front of her, the face of her chief operating officer, Marcus Thorne, looked pale. "Crystal, Ilara. I'm on it." "Good," she said, and ended the call without a goodbye. Ilara Vance, at 29, was the CEO of Vance Global, a technology and logistics empire she had inherited from her father and, against all odds and expectations, transformed into an industry titan. Her life was a fortress built of board meetings, stock prices, and strategic acquisitions. She was formidable, respected, and deeply, profoundly isolated. Her days were scheduled to the minute, her interactions transactional, her emotions a liability she kept under lock and key. She rubbed her temples, a headache blooming behind her eyes. It had been a brutal week of negotiations for a hostile takeover, and she was running on little more than caffeine and sheer force of will. She glanced at her reflection in the dark screen. A woman with sharp, intelligent features, impeccably styled dark hair, and eyes that were a striking, unusual shade of green. Eyes that most people found intimidating. She rarely smiled, and when she did, it seldom reached them. She hated being driven. She preferred the control of being behind the wheel herself, but her board insisted on a driver for security reasons, another gilded bar in her cage. Her driver, a stoic man named Arthur, navigated the congested streets with practiced ease. "We're about 10 minutes out from the office, Ms. Vance," Arthur's voice came through the intercom. "Thank you, Arthur," she murmured, turning her attention back to the tablet in her lap, her mind already moving on to the next problem, the next fire to extinguish. She didn't remember a girl named Ellie. That part of her life, a brief, tumultuous period before her father's first big success, had been intentionally and systematically buried. Her childhood was a collection of fragmented, uncomfortable memories, moving suddenly, the stress on her parents' faces, the shame of their poverty. She remembered a feeling of loss, a deep ache of loneliness that she had learned to channel into ambition. Anything that made her feel weak, she discarded. Her past was a weakness. The name Ellie, the face of a little boy, the feel of a small wooden object in her hand, these were ghosts she had long since exorcised. Or so she believed. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from her mother. "Just thinking of you, sweetie. Are you eating?" Elara sighed. She typed back a quick, perfunctory response, "I'm fine, Mom. Busy." She put the phone down and stared out the window, a sudden, inexplicable wave of melancholy washing over her. The city lights were beginning to blur. She felt a phantom ache for something she couldn't name, a longing for a simpler time, a connection that wasn't based on a stock portfolio or a business proposal. It was a fleeting, dangerous feeling, and she pushed it down, back into the vault where it belonged. The intersection of 23rd Street and Park Avenue was a nexus of hurried footsteps and honking horns. Leo was approaching it from the north, his eyes scanning for an opening. He had the priority package from Sterling Tower secured in his messenger bag, its importance fueling his urgency. The light was green, but he knew better than to trust a New York City green light. He was a defensive rider, his senses honed by years of near misses and the folly of distracted drivers. He saw the limousine, a sleek, black vessel of wealth and power, gliding into the intersection from the opposite direction, preparing to make a left turn. He also saw the box truck, a hulking, rusty beast, barreling down 23rd Street from the east, clearly trying to beat the yellow light that was about to turn red. Time seemed to slow down, to stretch and warp. Leo's brain processed the physics of the impending disaster in a horrifying flash. The truck driver was looking at his phone. The limo was already committed to the turn. The two vehicles were on a collision course. Everything happened at once. The light turned red. The truck didn't slow down. The screech of its brakes was a scream of tortured metal, a sound that came far too late. Leo's training, his instincts, his very survival mechanisms took over. He wasn't thinking about himself. He was looking at the limousine's back passenger door, the exact point of impact. Without a conscious thought, he stood up on his pedals, pushing with every ounce of strength he possessed, not to get out of the way, but to close the distance. It was a mad, irrational impulse. Inside the limo, Elara looked up from her tablet, annoyed by the sudden, violent braking sound. She saw Arthur's eyes widen in the rearview mirror. She turned her head and saw a wall of rusted red steel filling her window. There was no time to scream. The world exploded in a cataclysm of sound and force. The impact was deafening, a percussive blast of shattering glass and groaning, crumpling metal. Elara was thrown sideways, her head striking the reinforced window frame with a sickening crack. The world dissolved into a kaleidoscope of spinning lights and sharp, searing pain before fading to black. Outside, the scene was chaos. The truck had T-boned the limousine, crushing its rear half. But the impact was less direct, less catastrophic than it should have been. Just a split second before the collision, Leo's bicycle had slammed into the limo's rear fender. It was a minuscule impact in the grand scheme of things, a gnat hitting a giant, but it had been enough. It had nudged the limo forward by a precious foot or two, turning a direct, fatal impact on the passenger door into a slightly less direct, glancing blow. Leo was thrown from his bike, his body tumbling across the slick asphalt. Pain erupted in his shoulder and knee as he skidded to a stop near the curb. His helmet had saved his life, but his head rang like a bell. His bike was a mangled wreck, its front wheel bent into a figure eight. Ignoring the fire in his own body, he scrambled to his feet, his adrenaline-pumping heart drowning out the pain. His gaze was locked on the crushed limousine. Smoke or steam was beginning to hiss from under its hood. He could hear the truck driver groaning, but his focus was singular. The passenger. He ripped open the limo's front door. The driver, Arthur, was slumped against the steering wheel, conscious but dazed, a gash on his forehead. "Are you okay?" Leo yelled over the din of car horns and the beginnings of distant sirens. The passenger? "Ms. Vance." Arthur mumbled, pointing toward the back. The back door was jammed, bent inward by the force of the crash. Leo pulled at the handle, his muscles straining, but it wouldn't budge. Panic began to claw at his throat. He looked through the shattered, spiderwebbed window. He saw her. A woman in a dark, tailored suit, slumped unconscious against the far door. A trickle of blood ran from her hairline, stark against her pale skin. Her face was partially obscured by her dark hair, but there was something about her, a familiarity that pricked at the edges of his consciousness, a ghost of a ghost. "Stand back," he yelled to no one in particular. He took a few steps back, then lunged forward, slamming his uninjured shoulder into the window. The safety glass held. He did it again, grunting with effort and pain. On the third try, the fractured glass gave way, shattering inward. He carefully cleared the remaining shards from the frame, his calloused hands moving with a surgeon's precision. He reached inside, his heart pounding against his ribs. "Miss? Can you hear me?" No response. He unlocked the door from the inside and wrenched it open. The smell of deployed airbags and something faintly electrical filled the air. He leaned in, his mind racing. He remembered a first aid course he'd taken years ago. Check for breathing. Don't move them if you suspect a neck injury. He gently brushed the hair from her face to get a better look, to check her breathing. And then he froze. His breath caught in his throat. The world around him, the sirens growing closer, the shouting onlookers, the pain in his own body, it all faded away into a muffled roar. He was looking at her eyes. They were closed, but he knew their color. He had spent 2 decades searching for them. Moss green. The shape of her face, the curve of her jaw, older now, sharper, framed by success and stress, but unmistakably hers. It couldn't be. It was impossible. A hallucination brought on by the crash, by the blow to his head. A cruel trick of his own desperate, longing mind. "Ellie," he whispered, the name a fragile, disbelieving puff of air. She didn't stir. Her breathing was shallow, but it was there. The sirens were deafening now, their red and blue lights painting the chaotic scene in strobing flashes. Paramedics were swarming the area. One of them was suddenly at his side. "Sir, you need to step back. Let us handle this." Leo felt a hand on his good shoulder, pulling him away. He stumbled back, his mind reeling, his gaze still fixed on the woman's face as the paramedics carefully fitted a neck brace on her and prepared to move her to a stretcher. He watched them lift her out. As they did, something small and metallic slipped from her limp hand and clattered onto the floor of the limo, unnoticed by the frantic first responders. Leo's eyes darted to it. It was a small, high-end smartphone, its screen shattered. But that's not what held his attention. Attached to the phone's case by a small, elegant chain was a charm. It was a small, wooden bird. It was carved from a darker wood, maybe walnut, and its wings were folded, its head bowed as if it were sleeping. It was the perfect counterpart, the missing half, to the one tucked safely in his own pocket. The world tilted on its axis. It was her. After all these years, after 1,000 false hopes and 1,000,000 scanned faces, it was her. He had found her. He had saved her life only to realize she was the one person he had spent half of his own life searching for. As the paramedics loaded her into the ambulance, a police officer approached Leo. "Sir, are you the one who pulled her from the vehicle?" Leo could only nod, his throat too tight to speak. "We need to get your statement. And you need to get checked out by the paramedics, you're bleeding." Leo looked down at his arm, seeing the blood for the first time, but feeling nothing. All he could feel was the seismic shock of a 20-year-old promise crashing into the present moment. The ambulance doors closed, and it pulled away, its siren wailing as it disappeared into the river of traffic, carrying away the ghost he had chased for a lifetime, now made of flesh and blood. He was left standing on the cold, broken asphalt, a hero to the gathering crowd, but a man completely and utterly adrift. Questions for Act 1. What does the wooden bird symbolize for Leo, and how has this symbolism shaped his adult life? Act 2, The Unforeseen Offer. The hospital was an antiseptic world of muted beeps and hushed conversations, a stark white counterpoint to the chaotic colors of the crash. Ilara woke up slowly, as if surfacing from a deep, dark ocean. The first thing she registered was a dull, throbbing pain in her head. The second was the unfamiliar starched linen smell. She opened her eyes, blinking against the soft, indirect light. A man in a sharp suit stood up from a chair in the corner of the private room. It was Marcus Thorne, her COO, his face a mask of professional concern. "Ilara. Thank God," he said, his relief palpable. "The doctors said you were stable. A concussion and a few cracked ribs. They said you were incredibly lucky." "Lucky?" Ilara's voice was a dry rasp. She tried to sit up, but a sharp pain in her side made her wince. "What happened?" "There was an accident. A truck ran a red light. It hit the limo," Marcus explained, his voice gentle. "Arthur is fine, just some cuts and bruises. You were closer to the impact." Fragments of memory returned. The screeching brakes. The wall of red metal. The shattering glass. A shiver ran through her. "The impact," she said, her mind struggling to piece it together. "It should have been worse. It should have been fatal," Marcus said grimly. "That's what the police report said. But something, or someone, changed the trajectory at the last second. A bicycle courier. He apparently saw what was about to happen and deliberately crashed his bike into the limo's fender. The police said it pushed the car forward just enough to turn a direct hit on your door into a glancing blow. He pulled you from the wreckage before the paramedics arrived." Ilara stared at him, trying to process the information. A stranger. A bicycle courier had intentionally crashed, had risked his own life, to save hers. Gratitude was an unfamiliar, disorienting emotion. It felt heavy, like a debt. "Who was he?" she asked, her voice gaining some of its usual strength. "Where is he?" "We don't know his name yet," Marcus admitted. "He gave a statement to the police and then refused medical treatment and left the scene. They have his contact information from the courier service, though. He was quite injured, from what I heard. Dislocated shoulder, severe lacerations." The thought of this unknown man, injured and anonymous, leaving the scene while she was being brought to this luxury hospital suite, sat uncomfortably with her. It was an imbalance. In Ilara's world, all debts were paid, all ledgers balanced. "Find him, Marcus," she commanded, her CEO persona reasserting itself over the pain and confusion. "Use whatever resources you need. Find out his name, his condition, everything. I want to see him." "Of course, Ilara," Marcus said, already pulling out his phone. "I'll have a team on it immediately." Ilara leaned back against the pillows, the throbbing in her head a dull, persistent drum. A courier. A man who lived his life on the streets she only ever viewed through tinted glass. He had intervened in her life in the most profound way possible, a ghost of a man who had pulled her back from the brink. She felt a strange, nagging curiosity that went beyond mere gratitude. She needed to see him, to understand why he would do such a thing. She needed to put a face to her savior. Leo sat on the edge of his lumpy mattress, his bare torso a roadmap of purple and blue bruises. His left arm was in a sling, his shoulder a constant, searing fire. A doctor at a cheap urgent care clinic had popped it back into place and given him a prescription for painkillers he couldn't afford to fill. His bike was a total loss, which meant his job was, too. His meager savings would evaporate in a month, maybe two. But the physical pain and the looming financial disaster were distant noise. His mind was a tempest, replaying the crash, the shattered window, and the face of the woman inside. Ellie. Ilara Vance. He had spent the night in a feverish daze, oscillating between disbelief and a strange, hollow certainty. He had gone online, his hands shaking as he typed her name into the search bar. The results were overwhelming. Countless articles, interviews, photos. The CEO of Vance Global. A prodigy of the tech world. A woman known for her ruthless business acumen and her guarded privacy. He studied the photos, searching for the girl he knew in the face of this powerful woman. He found it in the small things, the way her brow furrowed slightly when she was concentrating, the determined set of her jaw. And her eyes. In every professional headshot, her moss-green eyes were cool and appraising, but he could still see the ghost of the curious, bright-eyed girl who had once dared him to climb the tallest tree in the woods. And the bird. The dark wooden bird on her phone case. It was the proof, the undeniable link. His heart ached with a complex mix of emotions, wonder, relief, and a profound, crushing sense of inadequacy. The little girl who had shared his secrets and dreams was now one of the most powerful women in the city. She lived in a world of skyscrapers and boardrooms, a world he could only ever glimpse from the street below. What could he possibly say to her? "Remember me? We were friends when we were poor." The thought was humiliating. He had found her, but he had also lost her all over again. The chasm between their lives was no longer just time and distance, but a vast, unbridgeable gulf of wealth and status. He had saved Elara Vance, the CEO. But he was still searching for Ellie, the girl who was now, it seemed, more lost to him than ever. His phone buzzed, a number he didn't recognize. He ignored it. It buzzed again. And again. On the fifth try, he answered, annoyed. Hello? Is this Leo Martinez? The voice was male, professional, and crisp. Who's asking? Leo said, his tone wary. My name is Marcus Thorne. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Vance Global. I'm calling on behalf of Ms. Elara Vance. Leo's blood ran cold. He sat up straighter, a jolt of adrenaline cutting through the pain. Is she okay? She is recovering, thanks to you, the voice said. Ms. Vance is extremely grateful for your actions, Mr. Martinez. She would like to meet with you, to thank you in person. And, of course, to compensate you for your injuries and the loss of your property. Compensate him. The word felt cold, transactional. Like he was a problem to be solved, a line item in a budget. That's not necessary, Leo said, his pride stinging. Ms. Vance insists, Marcus said, his tone leaving no room for argument. She has also taken the liberty of covering your medical expenses. We would like to send a car for you tomorrow at 10 a.m. to bring you to our headquarters. Leo was cornered. To refuse would be churlish. To accept felt like capitulation. But curiosity, and a desperate, foolish hope he couldn't quite extinguish, won out. He wanted to see her. He needed to see her, to confirm with his own eyes that the woman in the limousine was the girl from his past. Fine, Leo said, his voice tight. 10 a.m. He hung up the phone and looked around his small, cluttered apartment. A world away from Vance Global headquarters. He felt like a commoner being summoned to the royal court. He was terrified. The next morning, a black town car, identical to the one from the accident, purred at the curb outside his rundown building. Leo, dressed in his only clean, non-work clothes, a pair of dark jeans and a slightly faded button-down shirt, felt a wave of self-consciousness as he climbed inside. The interior smelled of wealth. The journey to Vance Global headquarters was a journey into another dimension. The building was a testament to power, a shard of glass and steel that pierced the clouds. In the lobby, Marcus Thorne, the man from the phone, met him. He was impeccably dressed, with an air of harried efficiency. Mr. Martinez. Thank you for coming, Marcus said, giving him a swift, assessing glance that took in his sling and the faint bruise on his cheek. Right this way. Ms. Vance is waiting. They rode a silent, high-speed elevator that made Leo's ears pop. His heart hammered against his ribs. The doors opened onto the top floor, a space that was less an office and more a modern art gallery. Minimalist furniture, panoramic views of the city, and a silence so profound it felt heavy. And there she was. She was standing by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the city that was now hers to command. She was dressed in a simple but elegant gray dress, her arm also in a sling, a mirror of his own injury. She turned as he entered, and their eyes met for the first time when she was conscious. Her moss-green eyes widened slightly. There was a flicker of something in them, not recognition, but a kind of startled curiosity, as if she were seeing him more clearly than she saw most people. Mr. Martinez, she said, her voice softer than it had been on the phone, but still carrying an innate authority. Thank you for coming. Please, have a seat. Leo sat on the edge of a sleek leather chair that probably cost more than his entire apartment. He felt clumsy, out of place, his worn jeans an insult to the pristine environment. I wanted to thank you, Elara began, her gaze direct and unnerving. What you did was extraordinarily brave. You saved my life. There is no other way to put it. I just acted, Leo mumbled, his eyes fixed on a point on the floor. He couldn't bring himself to look at her for too long, afraid of what she might see in his expression. You acted, and I am alive because of it, she stated, as if it were an indisputable fact in a legal document. I understand your bicycle was destroyed, and you were injured. Vance Global will, of course, cover all of that. We've arranged for a settlement that I think you will find more than generous. She gestured to a folder on the table between them. Leo didn't look at it. I didn't do it for money, Ms. Vance. A flicker of surprise crossed her features. I don't believe you did, she said slowly, studying him. Which brings me to my actual proposal. Marcus tells me you were a courier. A physically demanding job that you are now unable to perform for the foreseeable future. I'll manage, Leo said, his jaw tight. I'm sure you would, Elara replied, a hint of admiration in her voice. But I have a different idea. The police report included your statement. It was clear, concise, and remarkably observant. You assessed a complex, high-speed situation in milliseconds and made a tactical decision. That's a valuable skill. She paused, leaning forward slightly. I'm not offering you charity, Mr. Martinez. I'm offering you an opportunity. I have an opening in our logistics division. An analyst position. It involves route optimization, risk assessment, efficiency tracking. It's a desk job. A white-collar job. It pays well, and it has benefits. Based on what I've seen of your character and your clear ability to think under pressure, I believe you would be an asset to my company. Leo was stunned into silence. He stared at her, his mind reeling. A job. A real job. A career. A way out of the life he was trapped in. It was everything he could have ever hoped for, being handed to him by the one person in the world he couldn't accept it from. It felt like a gilded cage, a way for her to balance the scales and discharge her debt to him. Why, he finally managed to ask. You don't know me. I know you're the kind of person who runs towards a disaster, not away from it, she said simply. I know you risked your life for a stranger. In my business, loyalty and integrity are commodities. I find them, I invest in them. This isn't a reward, Mr. Martinez. It's a recruitment. He looked into her eyes, searching for any sign, any flicker that she remembered him. There was nothing. Just the cool, appraising gaze of a CEO making a strategic move. He was a puzzle to her, an interesting variable, nothing more. The pain of that realization was sharper than the pain in his shoulder. But what choice did he have? His life was in shambles. This was a lifeline, a chance to rebuild, to be someone. And, a small, treacherous voice in the back of his mind whispered, it was a chance to be near her. A chance to understand the woman she had become. Maybe, just maybe, a chance for her to one day see him for who he was. His pride warred with his pragmatism. The weight of 20 years of searching pressed down on him. Okay, he said, the word barely audible. I accept. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched Alara's lips. It was a smile of satisfaction, of a problem solved. Good, she said, standing up. Marcus will handle your onboarding. Your start date is Monday. Welcome to Vance Global, Leo. She used his first name. It sent a jolt through him. As he was led out of the office by Marcus, back into the elevator that would return him to his own world, Leo felt a dizzying mix of triumph and despair. He had a new life, a new future. But it had been given to him by the ghost he'd been chasing, a woman who looked right through him and saw only a stranger she was indebted to. The search was over, but the real mystery was just beginning. Music enters with a thoughtful, slightly melancholic melody, hinting at the complexity of the new situation. Questions for Act 2. Alara's offer of a job is framed as a recruitment rather than a reward. Do you believe her? What might be her conscious and subconscious motivations for making such an offer? ACT 3, The Lingering Mystery. Monday arrived with the cold, impersonal gleam of a freshly wiped slate. Leo walked into the shimmering lobby of Vance Global not as a visitor, but as an employee. He wore a new, ill-fitting suit, purchased with an advance Marcus had arranged, feeling like a boy playing dress-up in his father's clothes. The ID card clipped to his pocket felt foreign and heavy. He was Leo Martinez, logistics analyst. The title sounded like it belonged to someone else. His cubicle was one of hundreds in a vast, open-plan office on the 34th floor. It was a sterile, gray box, identical to all the others, but to Leo, who was used to the open road and the city sky, it felt like a cage. His colleagues were polite but distant, a blur of busy faces and professional jargon. They moved with a practiced efficiency, their fingers flying across keyboards, their voices a low murmur of conference calls and deadlines. Leo was a fish not just out of water, but on a different planet. The language of spreadsheets, data analytics, and supply chain acronyms was alien to him. Yet, he had always been a quick study. The same observant mind that had kept him safe on the streets now devoured training manuals and operational flowcharts. He applied the logic he used to find the fastest route through midday traffic to optimizing shipping lanes and delivery schedules. He worked with a quiet, desperate intensity, fueled by a need to prove that Alara's investment in him was not a mistake. He arrived early. He stayed late. He asked questions, he listened, and he learned. Slowly, the alien language began to make sense. He started to see the patterns in the data, the hidden inefficiencies, the city's circulatory system from a new, godlike perspective. He was good at it. The discovery was both a relief and a source of deep unease. He rarely saw Alara. She was a phantom on the top floor, a name in company-wide emails, a legend. When he did catch a glimpse of her, striding through the lobby flanked by executives, her face set in a mask of concentration, his heart would perform a painful, lurching flip. She never seemed to notice him, just another face in her sprawling empire. Each non-glance was a small paper cut on his soul. He was invisible to her, a problem solved and filed away. About a month into his new role, the Ethelred project, the same one he'd overheard her discussing in the limo, was still a source of major friction. A crucial shipment of proprietary microchips was stuck in customs due to a documentation error, threatening to derail the entire project timeline yet again. The logistics team was in a panic, and the blame was flying. Leo, poring over the shipping manifests and communication logs late one evening, found it. A tiny discrepancy in a customs code, a single digit transposed, cross-referenced with an obscure international trade bulletin from 3 months prior. It was a needle in a haystack, an error no one else had caught. He drafted an email, not to his immediate supervisor, but directly to Marcus Thorne, detailing the error and outlining the precise steps needed to correct it. He hesitated for a full 10 minutes before hitting send, his hand trembling. It was a bold, protocol-breaking move. The next morning, he was summoned. Not to his manager's office, but to the top floor. The elevator ride felt even longer this time. He walked into Ilara's office to find her and Marcus standing over a conference table, looking at a printout of his email. "This is your work, Martinez?" Ilara asked, her tone unreadable. She didn't use his first name this time. "Yes, Ms. Vance," Leo said, his throat dry. Marcus looked impressed. "It was brilliant. The customs office confirmed it. You just saved us a 2-week delay and potentially millions in penalties." Ilara was silent for a moment, her green eyes boring into Leo. She wasn't looking at him like an employee. She was looking at him like a fascinating, unexpected variable she was trying to solve. "How did you find this?" 3 senior analysts missed it. "I used to deliver documents to the International Trade Building," Leo said, the words tumbling out. "I'd see the bulletins posted. The code series looked familiar, but off. So I cross-referenced it." He didn't mention that he read everything he could get his hands on, that his mind was a sponge for stray information. It was a habit born from a historian's curiosity. A flicker of something, surprise, respect, passed through Ilara's eyes. "You connected a memory from your old job to a multi-million-dollar logistics problem." "I guess so," Leo said, shrugging his good shoulder. "Stay," she said, as Marcus gathered his papers to leave. "I want to go over the rest of these projections with you." And so began a new phase of his strange, bifurcated existence. He was still a junior analyst, but he became Ilara's unofficial troubleshooter. When a problem was too tangled, too nuanced for her senior team, she would call him up. They would work late, surrounded by the glittering lights of the city, fueled by coffee from her private machine. In these quiet, late-night sessions, the corporate armor began to crack, ever so slightly. The conversations would drift from supply chains to other things. They discovered a shared love for a specific brand of cheap, raspberry-filled pastries from a bakery chain that had been popular in the city's outer boroughs 2 decades ago. "I used to save my allowance for those," she said one night, a rare, wistful look on her face. "There was a bakery near where I used to live." Leo's heart hammered. He knew that bakery. It was 2 blocks from their old apartment complex. "The one with the faded blue awning?" he asked, trying to keep his voice casual. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with surprise. "Yes. How would you know that?" "I delivered there once," he lied, his heart twisting. "A long time ago." She looked at him, a strange, searching expression on her face. "It's funny," she said softly. "Sometimes, the way you say things, it reminds me of someone. A long time ago." "Oh?" Leo's breath hitched. "Who?" She shook her head, a frown creasing her brow as if trying to grasp a slippery memory. "I don't even remember his name. A friend. From when I was a kid." She gave a short, self-deprecating laugh. "Ancient history. It's just a feeling." The moment passed, and she was all business again, but it left Leo trembling. A feeling. He was just a feeling to her, a ghost at the edge of her memory. The familiarity grew, a subtle magnetic pull between them. He noticed the way she'd chew on her lower lip when she was deep in thought, just like she did as a girl. She noticed the way he had a habit of tapping his fingers in a specific rhythm on the table when he was working through a problem. It was a rhythm he had used to signal her from his window to hers. For Ilara, Leo's presence was a quiet disruption to her carefully ordered world. She found herself trusting him implicitly, confiding in him about pressures she never shared with Marcus or her other top executives. There was a calmness about him, a lack of artifice that she found both unnerving and deeply comforting. He wasn't trying to impress her or climb the corporate ladder. He was just there. Solid. Real. Her nights became troubled by fragmented dreams. A huge oak tree, the smell of damp earth, the feeling of a small, rough wooden object in her palm. She would wake up with a sense of profound loss, an ache for a life she couldn't remember living. The dreams were frustratingly vague, leaving behind only an emotional residue that clung to her throughout the day, making her feel vulnerable and distracted. One evening, they were the last 2 people in the entire executive wing. A storm was raging outside, a dramatic backdrop to the city lights. They had just solved a particularly nasty server farm issue, and a sense of shared accomplishment hung in the air. "We make a good team," Ilara said, looking at him. This time, her smile reached her eyes. They shone with a warmth he hadn't seen before. "We do," Leo agreed, his voice hoarse. The moment stretched, filled with an unspoken tension that had nothing to do with work. The professional boundary between them had become a thin, shimmering veil. Leo, lost in the moment, in the impossible reality of being here with her, reached into his pocket. It was an unconscious, nervous habit. His fingers found the smooth, familiar shape of the velvet pouch. He pulled it out and, without thinking, unwrapped the small wooden bird, its pine surface glowing in the soft office light. He held it in his palm, rubbing his thumb over its outstretched wings, a familiar comfort in a moment of overwhelming emotion. Ilara's gaze fell to his hand. Her breath caught audibly. The smile vanished from her face, replaced by an expression of profound, jarring confusion. Her eyes were fixed on the small carving. "What is that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Leo's blood turned to ice. He had been so careless. He looked from the bird in his hand to her shocked face. "It's just a good luck charm," he stammered, his mind racing. "Something I've had for a long time." "A long time," she echoed, her voice distant. She took a half-step closer, her eyes never leaving the bird. She looked like she had seen a ghost. "Where did you get it?" The question hung in the air, heavy and dangerous. The past was no longer a lingering mystery. It was here, in his hand, a small wooden object threatening to shatter the fragile new world he had built. He had to tell her. He had to know. But the fear of what would happen next, of breaking the spell, of being rejected not by a stranger but by her, was paralyzing. He looked into her moss-green eyes, which were now filled not with the cool appraisal of a CEO, but with a deep, forgotten ache he recognized as his own. The mystery was about to break wide open. Music enters, a suspenseful and emotional arrangement of the main theme, building tension before cutting out abruptly. Questions for Act 3. He was a fish not just out of water, but on a different planet. How does Leo adapt to his new corporate environment, and what skills from his old life surprisingly translate to his new one? ACT 4. The Unveiling of Truth. The silence in Ilara's office was a living thing, thick and humming with 20 years of unspoken history. The storm outside raged, mirroring the tempest that had just been unleashed inside. Ilara's face was pale, her eyes locked on the small wooden bird in Leo's palm. It was more than an object to her, it was a key, turning in a lock that had been rusted shut for decades. "Where?" she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. "Did you get that?" Leo's heart was a frantic drum against his ribs. The moment of truth had arrived, not by his design, but by a slip of his own guarded hand. The fear of rejection, of her seeing him as an opportunist, of shattering the delicate professional trust they had built, was a physical weight in his chest. But looking at her face, at the raw, unguarded confusion in her eyes, he knew he couldn't lie. The search had to end. He took a deep breath, the air tasting of electricity and rain. "A friend gave it to me," he said, his voice quiet but clear. "A long time ago. Before she moved away." Ilara didn't seem to be breathing. She stared at the bird, then slowly, her gaze lifted to his face, really seeing him for the first time. Not as an employee, not as her savior, but as a collection of familiar features she couldn't place. The thoughtful eyes, the quiet set of his mouth. "Her name was Ellie," Leo continued, the name feeling sacred on his tongue. "We had a fort. In the woods, behind the old Crestview apartments. It was an old oak tree." Each word was a hammer blow against the walls Ilara had built around her childhood. Crestview Apartments. The oak tree. Images, sharp and painful, flashed through her mind. The smell of damp leaves. The feel of rough bark under her fingers. A boy's serious face, his brow furrowed in concentration as he worked a piece of wood with a small knife. "We made a promise," Leo said, his voice thick with emotion. He finally met her gaze, holding it. "We each had a bird. So we could find each other again. No matter what." Ilara stumbled back a step, one hand coming up to her mouth. A wave of dizziness washed over her as the dam of suppressed memory broke. It wasn't a gentle trickle, it was a flood, a torrent of feelings and images she had locked away. The shame of their poverty, the terror of her father's unemployment, the sudden, wrenching departure in the middle of the night. And at the center of it all, a single, searing loss. The loss of her only friend. "Leo," she breathed, the name emerging from the depths of her memory, strange and familiar at once. It wasn't a question. It was a recognition. "Ellie," he confirmed, a sad smile touching his lips. Her composure, the carefully constructed armor of the CEO, shattered completely. Tears welled in her eyes, not of sadness, but of overwhelming, disorienting recognition. The phantom ache she had felt for years suddenly had a name. The fragmented dreams had a face. I remember," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I remember the treehouse. I remember you reading to me. I remember crying the day we left. The memory was painful. Her father, ashamed and hurried, had told her they were going on a trip. He'd told her not to look back, to forget that place, that life. And she had tried. She had learned to be strong, to be ruthless, to never be that helpless little girl again. Forgetting Leo had been part of her survival. She sank into the chair behind her, her body trembling. All this time, you were? I was looking for you, he finished for her. I never stopped. The sheer, staggering weight of that statement settled in the room. He had been looking for her for 20 years. The man who had saved her life, who worked for her, who she was just beginning to trust, was the boy from her buried past. The loyalty and integrity she had recruited were not for Vance Global, they were for her. For a little girl named Ellie. The revelation recontextualized everything. The accident wasn't a random act of heroism, it was Leo, instinctually protecting Ellie. His acceptance of the job wasn't just pragmatism, it was him finding a way to stay close to her. His insights at work, his quiet presence, it was all colored by a history she hadn't even known they shared. Your bird, Leo said softly. At the accident. I saw it. On your phone. Ilara's trembling hand went to her pocket, where her new phone now resided. The old one was gone, but the charm had been salvaged. She had transferred it without a second thought. It was a habit. She had no idea where the charm had even come from originally. She thought it was something her mother had given her years ago, a trinket she'd just always had. She shook her head in disbelief. I didn't even remember where I got it. It was just, always there. A piece of the past I kept without knowing what it was. She looked at him, her heart a whirlwind of gratitude, guilt, and a profound, aching tenderness. Leo, why didn't you say anything? When you saw me in the hospital? When I offered you the job? Leo looked down at the bird in his hand. How could I? The girl I knew was gone. In her place was, you. Ms. Vance. CEO of Vance Global. You live in a different world. What was I supposed to say? Hey, remember me? We used to be poor together? I saved you, and you were offering me a way out of a dead-end life. Telling you then would have felt like blackmail. Like I was using our past to get something from you. His honesty was a gut punch. He had been protecting her, even from himself. He had carried the burden of their shared history alone, navigating their new, imbalanced reality with a quiet dignity that now seemed almost superhuman to her. So you just decided to work for me? She asked, incredulous. To be this person, this logistics analyst, and say nothing? I just wanted to be sure you were okay, he said simply. And maybe? I don't know. Maybe I hoped you'd remember on your own. That the woman you are now would remember the girl you were. That you'd see me, not just my resume. The truth of his words settled between them, devastating and beautiful. He hadn't wanted the CEO, he had wanted the friend he'd lost. Ilara stood up and walked to the window, her back to him. She looked out at the rain-streaked city, at the empire she had built. It all seemed so hollow now, a fortress designed to keep out the very feelings that were now flooding her. The loneliness she had always carried, the drive to prove herself, it was all rooted in that frantic, middle-of-the-night departure. In leaving him behind. My father, she said, her voice quiet and strained. He was so ashamed. After he lost his job, we had nothing. When we left, he told me we were starting over. That we had to forget everything and everyone from before. He said looking back was a weakness. I was just a kid. I listened. She turned back to face him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. I buried it all, Leo. I buried you. I am so sorry. You have nothing to be sorry for, Ellie, he said, using her name softly. It sounded right. You survived. She crossed the space between them in a few quick steps. This time, there was no desk, no professional distance separating them. She stopped just before him, her gaze searching his. The day of the accident, she said, was not the first time you saved me. Without another word, she reached out and gently took his hand, the one holding the bird. Her fingers laced with his. And in the quiet of the office, high above the sleeping city, two halves of a whole, separated by 2 decades of life and loss, were finally reunited. The boy who had never stopped searching, and the girl who had forgotten she needed to be found. The truth wasn't an end. It was a beginning, a chance to rebuild a foundation that had been buried but never truly broken. The storm outside began to subside, leaving the world washed clean, and in the silence, they stood together, two survivors holding on to a small wooden promise. Music swells, a powerful and deeply emotional rendition of the main theme, filled with catharsis and release, then slowly fades to a gentle, hopeful tone. Question for Act 4. The revelation scene is a major turning point. Analyze the mix of emotions Ilara experiences: guilt, gratitude, recognition. Which emotion do you think is the most dominant for her in this moment, and why? ACTV, A New Beginning. The dawn that followed the storm was crystalline and bright. The city, scrubbed clean by the rain, seemed to hold a new, sharper clarity. For Leo and Alara, it felt like the first day of a different life. The air in the office, which had been thick with unspoken truths the night before, was now filled with a fragile, tender silence. They had talked for hours, long after the storm had passed, piecing together the jagged edges of their separated lives. He told her about his mother's illness, the mounting debts, his abandoned studies, and the constant, quiet hum of his search for her. She told him about the relentless pressure from her father to succeed, the loneliness of her position, and the strange, hollow feeling of achieving every goal she had ever set for herself, only to feel nothing. They were confessions made not between a CEO and her analyst, but between Leo and Ellie. The aftermath at work was awkward. When they walked into the office the next morning, Leo from the subway, Alara from her town car, the world tried to slot them back into their designated roles. Colleagues greeted Ms. Vance with deferential nods and Leo with casual hellos. But something had irrevocably shifted. There was a new softness in Alara's eyes when she looked at him, a warmth that had been absent before. There was a new confidence in Leo's posture, the confidence of a man who was no longer hiding a fundamental part of himself. Their interactions were now layered with a shared history that no one else could perceive. A simple glance across a boardroom table could convey a novel's worth of meaning. Marcus, ever observant, was the first to notice the change. He saw the way Miss Vance's voice changed when she spoke to Leo. He saw the way Leo was no longer intimidated in her presence. He saw the easy camaraderie that had replaced the formal tension. He wisely chose to say nothing, simply adjusting to the new, unexplained reality. A week after the revelation, Alara made a decision. She found Leo in his cubicle, an act that sent ripples of curiosity through the 34th floor. "Walk with me," she said, her voice quiet. They left the building and walked, without a destination, through the city streets. It was the first time they had been together out in the world, not as savior and victim or as boss and employee, but simply as two people. "This is strange," Leo said, looking at their reflections in a storefront window. The powerful CEO in her tailored coat and the man in his simple office attire. "It's only strange if we let it be," Alara replied. She stopped at a small park, a tiny oasis of green amidst the concrete. "I've been thinking about the job." Leo's heart sank. He thought she was going to fire him, that their new personal connection made their professional one untenable. "It's not working," she continued, and he braced himself. "You're not a junior analyst, Leo. You never were. You're my partner." Leo looked at her, confused. "Partner? You see things differently. You have a perspective that my entire executive team lacks because they've only ever lived in this world," she said, gesturing to the skyscrapers around them. "You understand the ground level. You understand how things really work. I'm not giving you a promotion because I feel guilty, or because we're friends. I'm promoting you because you are the most valuable asset I have. I'm creating a new position. Head of Strategic Operations. You'll report directly to me. We'll run this company together." Leo was speechless. It was an astronomical leap. But this time, the offer felt different. It wasn't a reward or a payment of a debt. It was a recognition of his true worth, seen through her eyes. "Ellie," he started, overwhelmed. "On one condition," she said, a playful light in her eyes he hadn't seen since they were children. "What's that?" "You have to stop calling me Ms. Vance. At least when we're not in a board meeting with people we're trying to intimidate." He laughed, a real, unburdened laugh. "I think I can handle that, Alara." Their new dynamic began to take shape. They were a formidable team. His grounded, human-centric logic tempered her aggressive, data-driven strategies. He taught her to see the people behind the numbers, and she taught him to see the global patterns his street-level view had missed. They balanced each other perfectly, their shared past a foundation of unshakable trust. One Saturday, on a whim, Leo drove them out of the city. He didn't tell her where they were going. They drove for over an hour, leaving the steel and glass behind for winding roads and autumn-colored trees. He finally pulled up to a chain-link fence surrounding a new, sprawling suburban development. "Where are we?" Alara asked, looking at the identical, pristine houses. "This is it," Leo said quietly. He pointed past the new construction. "Over there. That's where the woods used to be." They got out of the car. The air smelled different here, cleaner. In the distance, between two of the new houses, stood a single, magnificent old oak tree. It had been left untouched by the developers, too old and majestic to be cut down. Their tree. They walked towards it, their footsteps silent on the manicured grass. The lower branches, the ones they used to climb, were gone. There was no sign of a treehouse. But it was unmistakably their fortress. "It's still here," Alara whispered, her voice filled with wonder. She reached out and placed a hand on its rough, ancient bark. "I told you," Leo said, standing beside her. "Some things last." She leaned her head against the tree, closing her eyes. "All those years, I was running so fast, trying to build something indestructible. A fortress of glass and steel. I never realized I already had one." She turned to him, her eyes bright. "Thank you for finding me, Leo." "I told you I would," he replied softly. "No matter what." Their personal and professional lives began to merge seamlessly. He introduced her to the simple joys he had held on to: walks in the park, finding the best hole-in-the-wall food joints, the quiet satisfaction of reading a book with no agenda. She, in turn, opened up her world to him, not as a display of wealth, but as a shared experience. They attended charity galas where he felt comically out of place until she would catch his eye and smile. They took weekend trips, exploring the world together, making new memories to lay over the old ones. One evening, months later, they were in her apartment, a place that was slowly starting to feel like their apartment. It was a minimalist, elegant space that he was gradually filling with books and a comfortable, well-worn armchair he'd insisted on bringing over. On a small table by the window, overlooking the glittering cityscape, sat two small objects. His pale pine bird with its outstretched wings, and her dark walnut bird with its head bowed. They were placed together, two halves forming a single, complete story. Leo came and stood behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist as she looked out at the view. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked quietly. "The freedom of the bike? Being out there?" Leo thought for a moment. He thought of the burning in his thighs, the bitter cold, the constant anxiety of deadlines and debt. Then he thought of the feeling of the open sky, the city unfolding before him. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But the search is over, Ellie. I'm not looking for anything anymore. I'm home." She leaned back against him, her head resting on his shoulder. Her hand found his, their fingers lacing together. The powerful CEO and the former courier were gone. In their place stood Leo and Alara, two souls who had been pulled apart by circumstance and brought back together by a twist of fate, their shared past not a weight, but an anchor in the shifting tides of their future. The accident had been a moment of violent collision, but it had created a new universe for them both, one built on a foundation of childhood promises and the quiet, enduring strength of a love that had refused to be forgotten. The journey had just begun. Questions for Act 5. Alara creates a new, high-level position for Leo. How is this offer different from her initial job offer in Act 2, and what does it signify about the evolution of her respect for him and their relationship? Don't forget to hit the subscribe button for more emotional and heart-touching stories that speak to the soul, and share your thoughts in the comments to tell us which story you want to hear next.